It has been quite a journey this year, and I'm sure it's been quite a year for everybody here in this room. And for us, well, all the chaos has been happening in the world. We've had a bit of a flourishing here at the gallery with a year that's really celebrated fibre and textile artistic practices. And that started with our fibre show, and it's culminating with this exhibition here by Marjorie Coleman. We were incredibly excited to be able to put on this show, and we have been blown away by the sheer epic quantity and quality and diversity and experimentation on display within Marjorie's work. It really is completely mind-blowing, and I'm sure you will agree. And another thing that we've been really impressed by is the community that forms around Marjorie and around the fibre and textile world. You ladies are remarkable, and there's so many stories that I encounter daily in this exhibition space about what people do and how there's just such a passion and a love for this medium that I had no idea existed, and it's really come to fruition here this year, and we've felt very, very happy to be able to support this community through the fibre exhibition, through the Wafter exhibition, and now through this one here. So thank you, everyone here. I know there are many familiar faces out there, makers, creative minds, so it's a pleasure. But today, the focus is on Marjorie, an incredible maker with 5 decades of work here on display, and I'm so excited that Marjorie is here to have a conversation today, and I'm sure you'd much rather listen to her than you would me. So I will get this started. I guess I will pass the mic over to Marjorie now, who will say a few words. Thank you.
Would Toby start and stand up? Hello, everyone. Well, it's very nice of you to be interested in this sort of thing, I think. Can you hear me? As a preamble, I want to thank Janet for offering the space, but more than that, I want to acknowledge the 6 women who worked to make this exhibition possible. There's no possible way I could have done it. Wouldn't have occurred to me to do it. But they got together and thought, we'll do this. They've worked hard, they've sacrificed their own work in many instances, and I just want to acknowledge that because I really think that's as much part of this exhibition as my work. And I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, so 50 years, well, I would have been perhaps 5, perhaps 6, certainly not 8, when my mother showed me how to hold a needle and threaded it, and I made a lavender bag for my aunt in England. The stitches were that big, of course, but so I could say that from that age, probably for pretty nearly over 80 years, I've held a needle. Now, I've seen it all come and go. And I know now that some of you younger ones think, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. But to me, it's fairly of the times that I grew up in. Everyone experimented, they were skilled with their needles and so on. So I don't think it's as outstanding as I hope you do. But anyway. What else do I want to say about it? I don't know. People ask me how I did this and why I did that. Quite honestly, I don't know. I get an idea and I work at it and do it and then do that piece, finish it, roll it up, put it on top of the wardrobe. And that's the way it goes, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know, maybe some of the women here will ask me questions that might elicit some more ideas of how things happen, but I don't at the moment think I know how. What else do I want to say? Not much really. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing this by and large, I've learnt a lot of things. I've learnt that what I might think is a horrible little throwaway piece, someone comes along and says, oh, and it speaks to them. And I've learnt that things that speak to me, other people I've watched in the gallery, they'll walk by, they might give it 3 seconds and then walk on. Everyone's taste is different, everyone's heart is different about what touches them, and that's what makes it so interesting. You're never bored. When you've got something like this to think about, you are never bored. And that's a big gift. It's a big, big gift, I think, to have something on your mind and in your hands to work at. What else can I say? Not much, really. As you can see, I've moved through various phases. I had a phase when the quilts were big. I did quilts, in other words, bed quilts. And if you could hold that, Cherry, I'm going to show you a couple of things. Now, that is the cartoon, whoopsie, for the one that's on the wall there. And as you can see, you draw it big, and I can't quite remember whether I did that in pieces, but at the time I was doing these big things, I had a quite big light table. So you laid this on the light table, you traced it out on the cloth, and in those days, I'm embarrassed to say it now, but in those days we used to use water-soluble pens. Now, regarded as beyond the pale, but anyway, I probably used a water-soluble pen on that. I can't remember. But anyway, that's the sort of thing that happened, and you did it bit by bit. Now, thanks. And, the other one. The other one that's in a similar vein is, where is it? Over there, yes. And you can see that one I would have done, I'd have done that intricate bit on its own. I'd have traced that out and done that and then done the other lines later. The interesting thing about that first one is that on the cartoon I've written green, yellow, red, blue, nothing like what it ended up being. Absolutely nothing. I was astounded to read it myself. So things develop as you go. You see something, you see that's not right, you unpick it. I always regard unpicking as being just as positive as actual stitching because it's all part of the process. And the other one that I wanted to show you is this one because... Thanks. That's the cartoon for...
Turn it round.
Upside down?
Yeah.
For one of those pieces in the triptych there, the energy one. And that one I did by tracing on tracing paper, and then you tack the tracing paper over the actual piece. No more water-soluble pens. And then you stitch through the tracing paper, and then when that's finished, you rip the tracing paper out and you're left with the piece. But I just thought you might be interested to see the two different methods that you develop your pattern onto your background fabric. I don't know that I've got anything much more to say, really. I think I might wait for the questions. So, who's answering?
I think, Jan, you have to...
I will read little bits of my question, but the first thing is that Marjorie has already prompted me. It's the chicken or the egg question I'm asking. What comes first? Where am I? What comes first? The large armoury of techniques, styles, sizes, processes, materials and palettes, or is it the varied subject matter? She's answering straight away.
It develops bit by bit, I think. I do a piece and think, is that right or that's not right? So I can't tell you what comes first. I can't tell you much about how any of them developed, actually. They just developed themselves almost. Yeah, that's all.
As you can see, we pre-prepared some questions, but we hope we'll get lots more from you. One of the questions I have here, Marjorie, which has become apparent when I've seen the work that you put forward to the exhibition, is that you, in some cases, have revisited work that's been sitting there for a while. So I'm really interested to know, because I do this a bit as well, how does your artistic eye change over that period? So can you explain, give some examples?
Yes, it certainly changes. It develops, I think, and what you thought was sort of rubbish 10, 20, 30 years ago, you realise it's got possibilities because, well, it's just your taste changes and your insight changes and your experience with other artists, what they're doing now, changes. And so you see possibilities in things that you thought were going the wrong way, and you can perhaps develop them on.
Marjorie, hand stitching is one thing that has featured in your work over the 50-year period, from the ones along the back, which are fairly traditional bed quilts, which at the time was what everyone was doing. You had stitched them by hand, no machine piecing when it came to making quilts. But in the recent ones, the hand stitching has become the key to what they are about. The stitching is so expressive. Many of them use WA native plants and birds and, of course, the weedy sea dragon. Obviously, you have studied these in detail to be able to represent them so beautifully. And it's the thread which is stitched to draw the line on the actual piece. And as well as that, there's your interpretation of use of colour, use of stitch, that just gives it a very individual style. And this is typical of your pieces that are on most of them for the last 10 or 15 years. And in this gallery, they're shown on the two movable walls. So my question is, when you actually start, some of them you've just shown us, you actually stitch from what you've marked on the actual fabric to start with. Have you actually got to the stage where you just start stitching and see where the piece goes without really any preconceived ideas or even drawing anything to start with?
Up to a point I do, but I'm not an abstractionist, if that's a word. I like things to... I was always better at drawing than painting, let's put it that way. So I can draw things more... I suppose I like realism up to a point too, whether that's my generation or... I don't know, but I do like things to represent something. I don't have a feel for pure abstraction, you know, radical abstraction at all. I like something to speak to me about something. And that's why the titles of my pieces, I think, are as much an integral part of them as the actual stitchery. But getting back to stitchery, as I get older, I never really loved the machine, although as you'll see in some of them I've done machine work, and I you know, competently enough, I suppose. But I don't really enjoy machining. I like the quietness of hand stitching and the process work of hand stitching, almost contemplative. And I don't mind the time I spend sitting quietly stitching, because my generation, of course, was unemployable. We got the sack when we got married. So I had time. And I had time to think about things and develop them and stitch them gently, unpick them gently, redo them. And what was the rest of the question?
Whether you're now just start stitching and...
Oh, yes. No, yes, I suppose up to a point I do, but I like to know where something's going, or think I know where something's going, even if it doesn't end up there. No, I don't think I start stitching without knowing the general plot. No.
You mentioned the titles give the game away as to what they're all about, or it gives you half the story. Can you tell us whether the titles are something you have before you start, or whether it's something that evolves during the construction, or is it something you come up with afterwards?
The title seems to develop itself. It just pops up. It's not usually something that I have an idea of before I start. The work tells me what it's called and what it's about. It's about all I can say. The title becomes an integral part, as I've said, and it tells me what to call it. And sometimes if I don't know what to call something, I just leave it for a while, and then eventually it speaks to me. Yes.
Thank you. Perhaps at this stage we could ask if there are people in the audience who would like to ask a question. And we'll need to transfer the microphone to you so that it can be hit. Yes, Sophie, if you wouldn't mind doing it.
It's a pleasure to hear you and to look at your wonderful work. I wondered what the genesis was of the slightly abstract one, brown and white above and behind you.
Yes. Thank you. Look, I don't know. I wouldn't have known till perhaps yesterday or the day before when Letitia kindly took me into the workroom and we saw some of Janet's collection in which there was a lot of Rover Thomas. Now, I suspect that at the time that was made, I like Rover Thomas. I don't particularly like most Aboriginal stuff. It doesn't speak to me. But Rover Thomas did. And I rather suspect, although I can't really be certain, that I might have been in the thrall of Rover Thomas when I did that, because the colours are right, and I don't really know, but I suspect that.
You get fit with that microphone. Marjorie, like you, I love the Banksia species, and I was delighted to see how many times it appears in your work. Can you talk a little bit about what about the Banksia has inspired you?
Two microphones.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we lived in Hawaii, as I've said in the book, perhaps, and that was the Hawaiian patterns show that. And then I was in the middle of stitching a breadfruit or something, and I suddenly thought, no, I'm not Hawaiian, I'm Australian. And so I'll stitch Australian plants. And that includes roses as well, they're not Australian. And we had 20 acres up in West Gingin, and my husband would doing what husbands do on 20 acres, and I'd be sketching the plants. There were a lot of wildflowers on the block at the time. It was uncleared. And so I took to sort of sketching these wildflowers, and I was always very fond of Banksias. Also, in the 1960s, before Australian native plants were fashionable, I had in my garden exclusively native plants. And you know, people would look at them and frown and say, where are the roses? But I've always liked Australian native plants. I think they're more interesting. And even if they're not in bloom, the leaves are interesting, the foliage, and you know, and they speak to us of us, which I like. So I've always used native plants, and I suppose I stuck with particular Banksias because laziness. I don't know, I'd sketched them out and I've kept using the same image again and again. I had 2 or 3 Banksia images that I used. Same with the fish things, you know.
Sea dragons.
The sea dragons, thank you. I'm losing words, you know, you do as you get older. The sea dragons, I use the same image again and again and again in different contexts. And that doesn't worry me in the slightest, it's my image. So more than that about the Banksias I can't say, except I have 2 or 3 shapes that I constantly use in a lot of my pieces. I'm very fond of Banksias, and just as a corollary to that, 13 years ago I moved into a retirement village and I had various pot plants, one of which was a Banksia someone had given me in a pot. And that soldiered on and soldiered on, and you know, I'd water it a bit, and it kept on thriving, and all the other things died. I'm not a gardener. And the other day I looked at it and I gave it some water, and it put out 2 blossoms. Now that is a hardy plant. That is a very hardy plant, and it speaks to me of my background. That's all.
Thank you, Marjorie. Do we have other questions?
Good answer.
Marjorie, in the exhibition you have a number of different renditions of the Tree of Life,
Yes.
and they're all different. And one looks like a Middle East, maybe similar to a Middle East sample of it, but the rest of them are quite unusual and quite innovative. And I wonder whether you had some views about the Tree of Life and what it should represent as you progress through your life.
Thanks. No, I haven't particularly. The Tree of Life to me represents life. I suppose life in a way, and they're all different shapes and sizes, and I can't be very rational about talking to you about that because I don't know. But a Tree of Life to me, I can draw any old shape, and if it says that it's the Tree of Life, it's the Tree of Life. Yes. It's not helpful.
Marjorie, the question I have is about what you see as autobiographical. It's really how your imagery reflects you. Particularly, I'm thinking of self-portrait, and I'm also thinking of the Tree of Life, the way you use birds, and how much of certain of those actually reflect personal experiences. And do you start out by thinking, I want to say something about my own life? Or where does it come from, that motivation?
No, not at all. Practically nothing is autobiographical, I don't think, although in a sense everything is autobiographical. It represents the fact that everyone is connected to everything, is connected to everything. Every living thing is connected to every living thing. And I thought that it was only things with ordinary life in them. I've now come to understand it means plants as well, and maybe we might even take that down to microbes. I haven't quite got that far yet, but it's quite true that I do think everything is connected, and that gives me the, I think is that the sort of answer? What was the other question? I can't remember. What did she say?
in Europe and the self-portrait?
Oh, the Europe one is. Directly, yes. I had 4 wonderful weeks with a son of mine and his partner in Vienna. And we had a marvellous time because Ben and I liked galleries. So we spent 4 weeks doing all the galleries of Vienna. Marvellous time. Best holiday I've ever had. So that represents that, but it also represents my memories of my father and some of the background. Yes. It's something of the same thing about everything's connected to everything. So yes, well, you see, I spent a lot of time in New York. We were a year in New York, and I used to spend my days at the Metropolitan. And I used to take my lunch and I eat it with the students out on the steps because the cafe was too expensive. So I spent a lot of time in galleries. I spent a lot of time in the Hawaiian Gallery and in New Orleans, I guess. So I don't know that I can answer that, really. Yes, I've been exposed to a lot of art of different sorts. But I'm not a conventional artist. I'm no good at painting, hopeless. I can draw a bit better, but what's the question again?
Which artist influenced you?
No. I look at a bit of everything that's there, really. Yes, no, I'm not particularly drawn to some types of painting. I am, sometimes I'm not. I think it's, daubed. See, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I go back to the 40s and 50s. And as a matter of fact, we were very lucky because my husband was at Sydney Uni and our circle was the Sydney artists, Justin O'Brien, Jeff Smart, Sydney Nolan and so on. So those were our little dinner circle. So I suppose in a sense all their 40s and 50s and 60s work is my favourite because I'm stuck in it. But some of the more classical ones I like. I even like Klimt and all those lot. I don't know. Sorry, that's about it.
Are there more questions anyone would like to ask?
Thank you. Marjorie, I've known you've always had strong opinions about things, and it fascinates me that those strong opinions and responses to other people or other events that are going on in the world have appeared in your work over the years. So I'm thinking of your Dullflower series, which was made in direct response to a comment that activated you to make something in response, and also some of your more political works like The Time When Heaven Was Shut, that seem to relate to some very strong and powerful letters that you wrote to our Prime Minister of the time with regards to what was going on out there in the world. Maybe you might like to tell us a little bit more about those.
I turned those letters up only the other day. I'd written to the Prime Minister about the Gulf War, we shouldn't be in this, blah, blah, blah. And I got back, of course, a pro forma letter. He wasn't going to answer, was he? I've got sheaths of pro forma letters in answer to my letters. No, I don't do that sort of thing now. I've got tired and lazy and I'm over that sort of thing, yes. Yeah, oh yeah, it got something out. Oh yes, it did. Oh, well, that was a response to, again, this reaction to the Australian native plants. And I have a very dear friend whom I still see. We've been stitching together for 50 or 60 years, and her husband said, didn't like native plants, they were dull. So I thought, right, I'll fix you, Des. And I made the five dull flower quilts, trying to show that they weren't dull, in effect. That's all, you know, just fixing dares.
Are there any more questions? No. Thanks.
Marjorie, I'm really fascinated by your use of colour and...
Hold it to your mouth.
oh, sorry. I'm really fascinated by your use of colour. I'm really fascinated by your use of colour, and I want to know, a lot of the fabrics that you use, are they commercially dyed or do you hand dye your work?
I ever only use commercial fabrics, usually dress fabrics. I don't use the conventional quilting and stuff fabric, never have. Some of it I've dyed myself, I've printed. I probably haven't got much showing, actually. There's a couple of small pieces. I think I've done a little bit of dyeing, but dyeing's not really my thing. I've done a bit of printing and stamping and, you know, got that out of my system and thought, right, I don't have to worry about that anymore. And really, I think I've got my colour by just using different fabrics. Sorry.
Marjorie, would you have some words of wisdom for those who are just starting out in the field of textiles?
Do your own thing. Try not to copy. It doesn't matter. I mean, you mightn't like it. No one else might like it. That doesn't matter, but it's got to speak from your heart. It's got to be right out of you yourself rather than out of a pattern book.
Any other questions?
Marjorie, I was wondering, and talking with a couple of other people, we also had this question. How many, or did you have a lot of unfinished objects?
I've got a couple that haven't actually been, like there's a big quilt. Where is it? Oh, somewhere. Where is it, Soph? The one you look. Oh, it's not hanging. It's in the book. Okay. I've got a couple that I have pieced and not got quilted or quilted, so, you know, back of the cupboard. A few things, for instance, that Tifai one, the purpley one with the 4 flower things, I started that probably 20 years ago and then chucked it away, and then I thought, oh no, I can perhaps do something with that. So I didn't have anything better on the go at the time, and it wasn't exactly busy work, but I thought, you know, I'll do something with that. So that got done, and the dragon weed, the green one with the dragons in, I started that doing the dragons and didn't see it going anywhere until about 3 years ago. I suddenly thought, oh yes, it doesn't have to be the perfect thing. It can have weeds and seaweed and stuff. So I finished that off, and that's probably been 20 years. Yeah. Mostly, though, I finish things as they go, mostly, or else just put them in the back of the cupboard. I haven't got many that are unfinished. No.
Marjorie, do you still have ideas and techniques and things that you would like to try, or are you content?
No, I'm a bit tired these days. I'm wearing out. Yes, and also my eyesight's not as good as it was, and also my hand skills. I'm getting a bit wobbly. I can still thread a fine needle, but I'm a bit wobbly. And so I'm not doing the work, for instance, that I could do even a few years ago, like on that wall. I don't think I could do that now. But at the moment, I'm having a bit of a rest.
Well,
Marjorie, I don't want to ask you a question. I want to make a bit of a statement. Thank you very much for astonishing work. We are so proud to have this in the gallery. And Letitia has explained how this is the third exhibition of stitched work, and I'm being very careful not to say embroidered because you gave me a piece of your mind when I did that. But this is the third exhibition. The first one, called Simply Fibre, was just works from the Holmes collection, and it was mainly work, well, it was entirely, I think, work by artists who would call themselves artists. The next exhibition, the one before this, was 170 works by 170 West Australian women who stitch. And I keep thinking that if those women were filling in a form for asking if they can possibly go to Sydney and it said, "What's your occupation?" possibly none of them, apart from a few, would have said, "I'm an artist." But in fact, in my view, they were astonishing artists and astonishing work. And then, following 170 works by 170 people, we have 115 works by one person. And from my point of view, it's mind-boggling how the variety of your works, the perfection of your works, the thinking behind it. I love the bit of politics shoved in. It's just been an extraordinary experience for me to discover, as the teacher said, a whole world that I didn't know existed. Possibly Letitia knew a bit more than I did, but I had no idea of the scale of interest in stitching in just Western Australia. And many people here, or some people might know, that I have been honoured by the government to ask me to chair the board of the Art Gallery of Western Australia. And some of the women who've been along to see your show, I've engaged in conversation, and they have said they can't get the gallery to think about stitching as art. And to me, that is just, well, it's wrong. It's wrong. And so Colin Walker, the new director, and I, and the board, with the board's approval, we are really deeply committed to filling the gaps, and I think we'll call the campaign Filling the Gaps in the collection, with works by West Australian artists. There are so many West Australian artists who are not represented in the collection. One of the reasons being that the last director, who was there for 11 years, didn't think there was any West Australian art apart from Aboriginal art. In fact, asked a friend of mine, Tony Jones, is there any West Australian art? Well, yes, there is, and it should be in there. And I think that one of the things that you've convinced me with your work is that we have to have a push to make sure those people who choose the works for the gallery board to approve and so on, get the message that this is art. It's not just housewives sitting doing ladies' work. It's nice we have got a few token men here to hear about it, but in the main, and I really am deeply committed to the idea of your work and that of other stitchers becomes part of the gallery. One of the big problems we have, as everyone's aware, is storage. There are 3 or 4 galleries in the main gallery that are being used for storage instead of showing paintings and quilts and stitched work like you do. And I want you to know, Marjorie, that I did get some of the curators to come to the opening, and I know they are going to recommend to the board that the art gallery purchase the work, which I call the Mondrian work, but I know you've said Mondrian didn't use green, so you're not allowed to say that. But I've heard Sophie and you explain where that work came from in your progression and how it was the end of one stage and the beginning of another and so on. But I guess I'm just committing to all the women who are here that we really, in our filling the gaps, we don't only need to put in works by people like Rachel Code who are not represented, but people like many of you who make extraordinary things. So thank you so much for 50 years of meticulous work that gives us all so much pleasure and so much admiration for you.
Thank you for the space.
It's wonderful to hear those words from Janet. Perhaps we can all live in dreams of having a textile museum or textile gallery as a dedicated space if the art gallery isn't going to include all the pieces that we would like to see there. I'll hand over now to Leticia.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Marjorie, and another Marjorie, and Jan, and Cherry, and Sophie for helping make this a wonderful conversation. And there's a couple of you planted in the audience there. Marianne? Wendy. And Wendy. Sorry, I couldn't quite see you amongst all the faces. Now, we do have tea and coffee and afternoon tea, and you're most welcome to help yourselves and share me in giving Marjorie a final big round of applause, and thank you.